Hello, everyone, and welcome to Someone Would Buy My Business. I'm your host, Amber Christian, editor of Handmade Seller Magazine, and it is my pleasure today to welcome Julie from Off the Wall Quilts. Now, Julie is going to share the story of the company and some acquisitions that they've made over the years. So, we're going to get into words of wisdom about business acquisitions today. So, welcome to the show, Julie, and can you introduce the company that you work for?
Yes. Hi, Amber. Actually, the name of our company is Off the Wall Quilt. There's no
Quilt.
S
Sorry,
in our
no
name.
S.
Yeah, and,
Yes.
and I have to clarify that otherwise people can't find us. Um, that's always a problem. So, yeah, we do a lot of stuff. We manufacture and we retail, and kind of come from a funny background though. I was a tax professional and a business manager. And as a tax professional, I specialized in Schedule C or small businesses. So that's still kind of a first love of mine. I love helping people. It gave us a good understanding of what we were getting into. And my husband, who I work with, is a retired engineer from Boeing. And so, like, worked on airplanes and rockets. So, we do say sometimes you need a rocket engineer to figure it out. Um, and he can be as spacey as an engineer at times too. So we have a lot of fun. But we, like most people in the crafting businesses, we stumbled into this. I don't know anybody ever who's ever said, when they're 5, when I grow up, I want to have a crafting business. I don't know, maybe they do, but I don't think I ever did.
Yeah, me either.
So I fell into quilting, and that's a whole different story. I really accidentally started quilting and learned to design quilts. And before I learned how to quilt. And anyways, that's just a funny story. But uh, we ended up buying a business that was already established, and it was just going to be a little side thing, and just kind of grew from there. So what I can share with you is I hate it when you say I have words of wisdom and I'm really wise. I'm not. I can just tell you what not to do from my experiences, from the mistakes I made. Okay. So we had a little embroidery business. We both worked full time. And then I had a tabletop embroidery machine I was having fun with, and just started getting some jobs in for that was kind of fun too for small groups, not the sports teams, but nobody was approaching the musical groups and ultimate frisbee teams and science clubs. And then they didn't have logos, so I learned to digitize. So I could, do
Hmm.
some stuff and got a little bit bigger machine and then stumbled into quilting, like I said, and was invited by this woman that I had started with to come to be a certified instructor for her templates, which were called angle play. And I went to
Mhm.
that, and we became friends and started talking. And she said to me, "Do you think you'd want to buy my business?" And my first reaction was,
Ah.
no. Why would I want to do that? I have a job, I have a business, I don't know, a zillion kids at home. Because we only had 3 kids, but we had 12 exchange students over the years. So we
Oh
always
my.
had teenagers running around, and I was like, no, no, not interested. But they were getting older and moving out and stuff. So we bought it, and that was the first one, and totally ignorant about how to buy a business, and she didn't know how to sell a business either. She was absolutely honest and made no effort to try to rip us off or anything like that. And everybody's throwing advice at all of us, and um, it became very confusing. We also had built up enough of a relationship that basically it was a handshake deal. When we,
Mm.
we agreed on price and stuff, we said, oh, we should probably make up some papers because you have papers to sign when you sell something, right? That's where we were. So I went online to one of those legal websites and found a sales agreement and made a sales agreement, which was fine. You can do that. By the way, that's number one that I did right. This wasn't a mistake, was get it all in writing. Everything has to be in
Mhm.
writing. Everything, everything, everything.
Yep.
And getting a pre-made contract made us think of things that we hadn't even thought of. But then somebody said to her, well, you really need to hire an attorney to do this. And I said, you go ahead if you want to, but I'm not putting the money into it. I'm completely comfortable. So she went to
Mhm.
an attorney. Poor thing. came back with all these, and I think they had a brand new paralegal do it, all these markups and stuff, and documents that we should include. Now, these documents all referred to selling construction trucks, dump trucks, and machinery. And we met for coffee and looked at it, and we were both about on the floor laughing because clearly they didn't know anything about the business, hadn't even looked at the paperwork, and had just sent over a bunch of garbage. So if you decide to go with an attorney, and that might be a really good idea, especially if it's a bigger business and you're not as familiar as you can, but make sure you get an attorney that knows what they're doing.
That actually knows about M&A, selling businesses, someone that actually that is words of wisdom. And I've heard that a lot from people across different, not just unique to craft, but other industries. The person, if you need to hire an attorney, the person that you're hiring, it's not the same as who you might use for your day-to-day to register a trademark or other kinds
Yeah,
of things like that. And a lot of times attorneys can kill deals because I mean, if you think about like your deal, you look at it, you're like, really? I don't need construction trucks. Why is this in our sales
exactly.
agreement?
Exactly. So we used the one I wrote up, and there's never been an issue. Like I said, it was pretty straightforward, and we were
Mhm.
pretty comfortable. And then we bought, trying to get it in order. Oh, this is funny. At a quilt show, talking to the people next to us, nice people, and they came over the last day, and a woman kind of sidled up to me and said, "Do you ever buy other businesses?" And I go, "Well, that's how we got started. Yeah, we did that." And I thought she was looking for some people used to ask me for a lot of tax advice and stuff. So I thought that's what she wanted. She goes, "Well, do you want to buy ours?" I said, "No, what do you sell?" I hadn't paid any attention to what she had. She laughed, and we went over, and it's Cheryl Ann's design walls. They're the only freestanding portable design walls for quilters on the market in the world. We make them here in
Mhm.
Florida. And so I went over and I looked, and I was like, well, these are really interesting. I had seen one previously and had a bad experience with it, but looking at it, I realized the person had put it together wrong, so they weren't so bad. And so we chatted, and they have a great story. They would make a great like movie how they came up with these walls. Their family was great, but so again, just a lot of talking, doing a show together. We actually went down to Oregon. We were living in Washington then, and we went down and spent I think almost a week at her house with her, and got to know how they did things even better. And it involves a pig and a dog that's head was upside down, and bows and arrows. And again, came to an agreement that was basically a handshake deal. And so again, I just went back to the same place and came up with another sales agreement and inventory list and all that, and 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 moved it and took it over from there.
Yeah. Now these deals, were they primarily where you were mostly buying out inventory? Like how did you as a buyer think about even with a handshake deal, how did you actually think about how you valued these companies that you were going to buy? What additional things did you do?
That's the hardest part. In the quilting business, a lot of times the they're one person business, and it's really the name.
Mhm.
But so many people use their own name
Mhm.
that it's really difficult to for me to go in and say, "Oh, I'm Margaret." No, I'm Julie, and I don't even have the same style as Margaret. And so what I didn't realize for that first one with Margaret was that looking back now, I would guess half of her customers and followers were really committed to her, not the product.
Mm.
And
Yep.
so now I understand that. I had no understanding of that. So that value wasn't as much as I thought it would be. And I
Mhm.
also at that point didn't know how to project how much do I think those customers are going to buy in the future, because that's their value
Sure.
to you, right?
Right.
And it was kind of a one product business too. So if they had the whole full set of templates, at that point there was nothing else for them to buy. No, that was the
Mm.
first thing we realized we had to grow. But so was the customer list really worth much at that point? From my
Mm.
perspective today, I would say no. But it seemed like
Mhm.
a big deal to me at the time. So
Right.
something to keep in mind is what are the value of those customers and learn what that is in that industry and how that works.
Yeah, that's a good nuance to think about, especially if you're buying a business that has primarily a product that they make, and if it's a one purchase and done type of company, you're always going to have to find new customers for that.
Yes.
And that you would think about, how do I value that? You would think about that differently than a company that can sell products to people over and over and over again. So I
Hmm.
think that's even just a philosophical difference depending upon what that acquisition, what they actually are making.
Yes.
So I think that's a really good distinction. What other interesting things, now looking back at that acquisition, are there other things that you think, I should have maybe valued differently or thought about a little differently?
Well, the biggest mistake we made was not insisting that the product samples be included in the sale. Because in this case, it was
Mm,
quilts. So I had all these patterns and no samples of them. And in the quilting industry, it's really hard to sell a pattern without a sample. And they were
mm,
not my style. I thought I could remake them, and the patterns weren't really patterns that I followed. And I just didn't have all these samples. And I found that I really wanted to create new ones using the same method. It's a great method. And so it took me a while. But I can remember when I finally published my first pattern, the response was phenomenal. And the existing customer said, "We were wondering when we were going to see you." And
mhm,
so that's kind of getting over myself. I didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel up to par. I'd only been quilting 3 years, and
mm, mhm.
had, like I said, fallen into it. Didn't really have a clue. To this day, I don't care if everything matches and my corners are sharp. But now I realize that I have a whole lot of people who are with me on that, so it's not important. Excuse me.
Yeah, that is interesting that, when the customers were waiting for when your part kind of shows up, and then to realize that they just didn't need you to be perfect, what would might be called textbook perfect, but that was okay because they were like that too. It's like the audience is choosing you, wanting that thing that isn't that perfect stuff, because they go somewhere else if they want that other view of things. And so that's an interesting lesson to learn of, there is this piece of it as you move forward that really resonated with your audience because of your unique style.
Yeah, and going into a business now, and this was true of the last one that we bought. I haven't got to yet, but is going in, and a really important question to ask yourself is, can I take this product today and stand up and feel confident and present it as mine? Because I
Hmm.
was so scared with that first one. I was so ignorant, innocent, maybe naive. Um, but what I really needed to do was stand up and say, "This is mine now, and it's going to grow with me, and I'm going to grow with it." But I can stand up and be proud of it and hold it up, and I can hold my head high. And boy, I would just tell anybody that to do that. Can you do that? Are you ready to do that? Because if you're not, you're going into something really risky.
Right. And at what point will you be ready to do that? I mean, I had to go through that same journey, right, with buying the magazine, and it was shut down, and bringing it back and being able to say, this is me, and this is mine, and then figuring out what that journey looked like. And for me, I had to do a lot of iterating in the content to get the content to where I really felt like it needed to be. I started with the base, and then I had to work with it from there to get to a point where, no, I'm darn proud of what we make, I'm darn proud of all of the different things that we do, and you can stand up and talk about all that stuff. But you're right, there's a and then if you're not able to do it, you have to figure out how quickly you're going to get there. Otherwise, it's not going to go well if you can't stand up and be proud of that. And maybe you have to add or change it a little bit, but you're right. You have to be able to be like, this is me, and
You
this
have
is my
to
thing.
accept that you are going to stumble and make mistakes too, and you can't be
Hmm.
crushed by that. Um, I still have a problem with writing patterns because as soon as you hit print or send, you find a mistake. The first person that gets it finds a mistake, and I still just inside, I just get sick when that happens, and yet I know it happens. And these are quilt patterns. This is not somebody's going to choke or, have an allergic reaction or something terrible. It's just a quilt pattern. um, it's so, but I have to be able to deal with that. And you have to be able to deal with your family. Are they behind you? Do you have a partner or even
Mhm.
your friends? Are they going to support you in this, or are you going to be crushed if they don't? You have to have people that can be honest with you and tell you that's a bad idea. And you either
Mhm.
fight back or you say, okay, I'm going to listen to you because you give me good advice. And you just can't collapse every time something goes wrong. Because, gosh, you and I both, wouldn't we be on the floor 10 times a day?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. And sometimes the mistakes are inadvertent. I was just laughing this morning. I was just posting on social media. I had an oops on the Handmade Seller website where I had inadvertently reactivated Google Ads in one spot. Went to the homepage. You know what kind of ad was on there, Julie? A toilet. I'm like right on my beautiful handmade articles, a big toilet ad from courtesy of Google. And I was like,
Oh,
oh, part of me is like horrified. And then I just burst out laughing. I'm like, well, that wasn't what I was expecting. Let's go fix it and let's move on. But now I'm going to forever laugh about the toilet ad because you know
yes,
what? That stuff happens. We all will make missteps with things and
that's
mistakes. And
good.
you're right, you can't get crushed when the toilet ad shows up.
Did I ever tell you about the hexagons? I don't know if I told
I
you.
don't think so. I don't
This is
think
a
so.
little bit off, but I think we'll get back to this too. We had a customer request octagons. Now, one thing we love about our rulers is they're all customer driven. That means we get
Mhm.
requests and that's how we decide what to make. So we already had hexagons. And my husband said, the engineer's like, oh, octagons would be no problem. So he comes up with some octagons and he brings them to me and shows me. And we showed them to everybody who works here. And everyone's like, those look great. And so he puts them into production and he prints them and he prints the word hexagon on the octagons. You can't change it. You can't take it off. You can't fix it. It's permanent. So we have this pile of hexagons that are called octagons. Octagons are called hexagons. Yeah, I still can't do it. And I said, okay, we're going to call this a class. That's what we call when we make a mistake. We call it a class. We just took a class. Not only the engineer needs to get this right, but the proofreaders need to pay attention. I mean, come on. And I said, so I'm going to take these out to the dumpster. And the only debate is should we break them before we put them in there? The engineer says, you know what? Let's call them oopsagons and see if we can sell them.
That's funny.
We posted them on our website as oopsagons and said, they're octagons and they say hexagon on them, but you could mark it out with a Sharpie and write it on there. I mean, we just can't sell them that way. We sold out in a matter of hours. People still come to us and they go, do you have any oopsagons? And we're like, oh,
But that was a clever way to recover from a mistake, and these mistakes will happen
yeah.
in anybody's business, right?
So anything we make a mistake on now, we call it oopsagon. Yeah.
It's an oopsagon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that at some point, you may have to just print them that way and call them oopsagons. That's going to be the irony, is if that becomes a standing thing where now people want the oopsagons.
Well, next time we send out a mystery box, maybe I should have oopsagons in it. So, anyways, back to things we learned about this business. The other really big one that I am smarter at now, I'm not sure I understand completely, but you really need to understand the inventory that you're
Hmm.
purchasing because that's where the real value is. And lots of times, if you've been in crafts, you think of wholesale as 50%,
Hmm.
and that's not a good valuation. Because and even I go over this too with like retailers and stuff, there's so many more expenses involved with handling and processing inventory than just the cost of it, like storage. There's loss, not just theft, but damage happens. Things aren't perfect. You have a box of 10. By the time you open the 10th one, it's too late to return it, but you have 3 books that the corners are all crushed or whatever, and
Hmm.
so you eat some of that. So just having a good understanding of what you're getting. I mean, so in that first business, we were getting boxes and boxes and boxes of patterns. Okay, I didn't realize till much later that I couldn't sell those patterns. Um,
And why couldn't you sell those patterns?
well, they weren't my style, and that going back to that first mistake of not making sure the samples were included, I didn't have a sample of them.
Hmm.
So people buy what they see, and they couldn't see these. I really couldn't remake them, and didn't want to. That was really stifling to me to make other
Yep.
people's patterns, and so we had to go. We bought a shed and assembled it next to our garage, an 8x10 shed. Made sure it was watertight, and it was 95% full of just boxes of patterns. And so after storing those for a few years, okay, I think 2 or 3 years, I said to my husband, "This is ridiculous. We're running out of storage space for things we actually sell, and we have this
Mhm.
entire shed full of stuff we can't sell. So let's load it up and take it down to the recycle place." And he's like, "Oh, I can't get rid of stuff we bought. It's so valuable." And I'm like, "Except for it's not." And he
Right.
goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, let's give it away." And I was like, "Well, okay, but that involved work too. The boxes of patterns were just papers. They had to be folded and put in plastic bags." And so
Hmm.
he and my daughter assembled them in packs of 5 patterns. And so if you bought our biggest set of templates, you got a pack of patterns worth $60
Hmm.
um, as a bonus for buying that set. And people loved that. It actually was very effective. Some people would look at the patterns and say, "I would never make that." And I would say, "But there's great ideas in those patterns. So they're a great reference." And
Right.
so they like that. And it still took us, I'm thinking, 4 or 5 years to give away all those
To
patterns.
move
So,
all those. But the reality is, had you not done that though, you had that inventory cost essentially from that acquisition just sitting on your balance sheet, and you needed to do something with it as well, right? Because then otherwise you get the aging inventory problem too.
yes.
And they're just sitting there getting more and more stale for the inventory. And
So
so you can't really hide from it. You just have to figure out how you're going to have to go through it, right?
the actual value of it was probably 10% of what
Mm-hmm.
we paid for it. So that was a
Mm-hmm.
stumble, a class.
It was a
But
class. Yeah.
we had a friend that was helping us with accounting and stuff that was very helpful. And he told us to think of things like that as produce. And at
Mm-hmm.
what point do the tomatoes start to stink? So we still use that term a lot. We'll be walking around the warehouse and look at something that's getting a little dusty and say, "Ooh, is that starting to stink?" Now, that
Yeah.
doesn't apply to everything because sometimes we order so much of something to get the best pricing that we know will sell like in the next year, um, that it's not stinky for a year. Okay. But other things that kind of come and go, we had these misting bottles for a while, and we knew that there weren't going to sell for a really long time. So
Mm-hmm.
we limited what we ordered, and we kept a close eye. When sales started to slow down, we didn't order any more. So you have to keep an
Mm-hmm.
eye on your inventory. But when you're buying a business, it's really it's hard to know what's produce, and what you really need. But
Yep.
a red flag to me now is when there's a huge pile of it, of one item. So I should have
Mm-hmm.
known. Now I would know. Why do you have an 8x10 pile of patterns?
Right. Why is it that large
Yeah,
at that point? Yeah, and I think that that's a really interesting thinking of at least a segment of your inventory as produce. I think is a good way to look at it. And there's a lesson in here for sellers that you should think of your inventory as produce, and especially if you're going to sell your business too, because you could scare a lot of buyers off. They look at that, they're like, whoa, I don't want to have to figure out how to deal with that.
yeah,
But you as a seller, if you just start getting that moved out so that that pile is smaller and you're just getting it dealt with, there's less for the buyer to deal with later. And so people thinking about selling, that you might have to get creative and move some of that stuff just to clear the decks to be able to sell your business, so that the more attractive pieces are all still there and a lot of the problem things are kind of dealt with. Because like a buyer may look at that and just not want to deal with it. There might be some pieces of it, but then they don't want to deal with all the stuff that they're going to have to actually move out and clear out
yeah,
from their processes. So
yeah.
I like that idea of inventory as produce.
I am after that experience, I'm much more cautious about what's sitting there. And we also have
Mhm.
an activity now that we do that we call trash to cash. And we'll start a shelf when things start piling up too much in our work area, and we'll put things on there that just aren't selling or are oopsigons, um, and that kind of stuff. And then we'll get ready to have a sale. When the shelf gets full, it's time to have a sale. And we tell people what it is. It's oopsigons. It's inventory reduction, or it's warehouse cleanup. And so the way we price it is everything is one, $5, or $10. And that's hard because this is $100 set that should have
Mm.
sold, and for whatever the reason, it's not. And so to put $10 on it, it's hard for us to let go. I'm too tight for that. So we'll just say like everything under $10 is going to, or $20 is going to be $1. Everything between 20 and 50 is 5, and everything over 50 is $10. And we go through super fast with the pricing guide and slap a price on it, put them up on our website, and have the sale. And this is stuff that I was ready to. We have shopping carts. I was ready to throw this stuff in the shopping cart and wheel it out to the dumpster. So it was, in my brain, it was trash. It's still a
Mhm.
perfectly good ruler, but it has a smear on it or something. So we're playing trash to cash. It doesn't matter how much we get out of it, but instead of having to walk, and it's stinky down there, anyways. Uh, instead of having to walk down to the dumpster with the stinky stuff, I turn it into some amount of money. So
Mhm.
that helps us a lot, is to turn the trash to cash.
Well, and it's a good way to make sure you're not perpetuating the same problem you've seen in companies you're buying in case you want to sell yours someday.
Exactly, because who wants to go through all that old stuff? And but yeah, I would say not to kind of get it out of your head, even when you're valuing inventory, what the retail value should be, unless it's a really well put together business that's moving stuff really fast and has a real good inventory and sales records. I would say that none of that's relevant, um, because most of these little businesses don't have all that great of records and stuff, and you can still work with them, of course, but you can't value the inventory based on that. So you kind of have to look at it and go, what is it worth to me?
Mhm.
And if it's a pattern or a design you're never really going to sell, it's really worthless to you, and that's hard. That's
Yeah, that is hard to sit in that position of having to ask, and it isn't about what the seller thinks it's worth, but what you as the buyer think you can do with it. And that's I think, a really important lesson through the acquisitions too, because sometimes deals fall apart because they're like, well, no, it's worth this. And you're like, I can't sell that. So no, it's really not to me. And it's not about being cheap. It's about really knowing what you can and can't sell as a business. And so I think that's also a really important lesson learned of saying, you have to actually understand what you think you can do with it, and you'll have to spend the time as a buyer thinking about it, looking at it, doing the due diligence, reflecting on whether you can sell some of those things as a business. And so that's part of the due diligence before you even get yourself into signing that purchase agreement, is making sure you know how you're going to go about doing some of this stuff if the purchase actually goes through.
Yeah, and if possible, if you can spend a little time even with the seller in the retail setting, that would help a lot. For example, in that first company, and this is really true of a lot of people who are retiring, of course they're going to be older. This is not age discrimination. This is a fact. The reason they're retiring is because they're older and they don't want to work anymore. I'm
Right.
getting there myself. And so they've also been in business for a while, probably, and they might have a little bit older clientele. Okay, is that your target customer?
Hmm.
So, and like I said, half of them that first time were following Margaret anyways, and really weren't interested in me and my style, and that's okay. That's not insulting or anything, but really kind of moving on. So who am I going to be selling to? Who am I going to be focusing on? My style is different and appeals to a younger crowd than hers did. Not real young, but younger. So again, looking at how things are sold and understanding that helps me to understand the inventory and if I need it and if I can sell it or not. So that's just something to spend time. And I know you can't always get there, but um, even being there, I wasn't asking the right questions, and I was assuming I'd have the same customers, and that simply wasn't true. I have different customers, and that's a good thing. But the old inventory doesn't appeal to my customers. So, yeah.
Right, right. And it is a lot to think about and consider strategically about whether you can convert those customers. Are they going to become repeat customers? How are you going to engage with them? And it may give you even pause on whether it makes sense for you to buy because of the nature of the different types of customers and what will or won't appeal. So, oh, these are all really great lessons learned. So now, tell me, if people want to learn more about your company, how do they find you on socials?
Well, we're on Facebook as Off the Wall Quilt, no S.
Yep.
Um, and Instagram, same thing, Off the Wall Quilt. And I don't do a lot more social media than that because a wise man told me one time, be good at the things you do instead of being bad at a whole bunch of stuff you don't understand. So it's like, yeah, I opened a TikTok account and went, blah, 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 blah. So I have it, but you're not going to find anything there. Um, Thread keeps trying to get me to join that. I tried blogging for a while and I have nothing to say. I There's a blog on our website, but it's only interesting if you want some free patterns you can download there. But no, I don't have anything to say. Um, so yeah, pretty much Facebook or Instagram are the places, and I'm not always. Somehow my Facebook disconnected from Instagram. I got to get that hooked up because my posts aren't going over there anymore. But um,
Mhm.
mostly at quilt shows, though we are at a lot of shows, and sometimes I have my schedule up on my website even. You see, I need to
Mhm.
get better at this. We do a whole lot of wholesale. We make promotional items for stores and vendors to give away or sell, and so we spend a lot of time like at the wholesale places, and that's where I met you at
Mhm.
H&H. And um, so, really, most sellers retail sellers don't have a whole lot of time to be on social media unless that's kind of their platform. So
Right.
I can kind of get off the hook a little bit and that I don't have to do a ton on social media, and I don't. And I'm lazy sometimes. Some days I'm just lazy.
Well, this has been exceptionally fun today, Julie. I'm sure I'll probably have you back on in a future season because we could go on
We
about
could.
interesting stories and due diligence and all of those things because we've had a lot of fun conversations about it. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you everyone in the audience that tuned in as well. Hope you got some really interesting things to think about in purchasing businesses based on the various experiences that Julie has gone through. So thank you everyone, and we will see you next time.